The earth had forgotten water. Across the Amboseli Basin, acacia trees stood skeletal against a sky bleached white by drought. What should have been wet season was now the fourth month of dust. The waterhole at Kimana had shrunk to a muddy scar barely 20 meters wide, ringed by the tracks of desperate animals: zebra, wildebeest, buffalo. And elephants, always elephants, their massive footprints pressed deep into cracked clay like prayers unanswered. The calf was 3 years old enough to remember rain, young enough to still need its mother. It stood at the edge of the fever tree grove, trunk hanging limp, ears spread wide, trying to catch any rumble, any vibration that might mean family. The morning sun had already climbed high enough to turn the air into something solid and pressing. A heat shimmered off the pan in waves that made distant shapes ripple and dissolve. 2 days ago there had been 17 elephants. The matriarch had been leading them south toward the Tanzanian border, where scouts said a river still ran. The calf had been walking beside its mother, trunk occasionally reaching up to touch her mouth, her temporal gland, her ear, the constant tactile checking that young elephants do, the reassurance that the world is still safe. Then the lions came, not to hunt. The pride was simply moving through, 5 lionesses and 2 adolescent males, heading toward their own desperate search for prey. But the elephants panicked anyway. The matriarch trumpeted. The herd exploded into motion, a chaos of gray bodies wheeling in different directions, dust erupting, the thunder of feet that shook the ground. The calf ran. It ran the way its mother's legs ran, in the direction its mother's scent ran. But somewhere in the dust and the panic and the desperate scramble through thorn scrub, it turned wrong. When the dust settled, the calf stood alone in a landscape it didn't recognize, calling, calling, calling. No one answered. For 2 days it had been walking, not in any direction that made sense, just away from the silence, toward anything that might be sound, might be movement, might be the shape of safety. It had stopped trying to eat. The few times it tore down handfuls of dried grass, its stomach cramped, and it vomited them back up. Its body was running on memory now, on the fat reserves that should have lasted years, burning away in the panic metabolism of abandonment. By the 3rd morning, the calf could barely walk. Its legs trembled. Its eyes had begun to sink into their sockets, the skin around them loose and papery. When it breathed, its ribs showed clear beneath skin that was starting to wrinkle and fold. The temporal glands on either side of its face, normally smooth, had begun to seep a dark, sticky secretion. Stress, trauma, the elephant's body crying what its eyes could not articulate. It was thirst that kept it moving, some deep instinct that whispered, water means herds, means safety, means mother. So when the wind shifted and brought the smell of mud and green algae, the calf lifted its head. When it heard the deep rhythmic splashing of large bodies moving through water, something in its chest surged with hope. Big footsteps, heavy bodies, the slosh and grunt of a herd. The calf began to walk. On the waterhole appeared through the heat haze like a hallucination, a crescent of brown water surrounded by trampled mud. And animals. So many animals. The calf's vision was blurring at the edges, but it could make out shapes, large shapes, moving together in a loose group. The herd. The calf's walk became a stumbling trot, its trunk lifted, searching for scent, for the particular smell of its mother, of its aunties, of home. The water was close enough now that it could hear individual sounds, the splash of a foot, the grunt of exertion, the rumble of a throat clearing. Elephant sounds. They had to be. The calf entered the water. The cool shock of it against its legs made it gasp, made every nerve wake up screaming. It waded forward, pushing through water that came up to its chest, toward the shapes clustered in the deeper section. One of them was close, 3 meters away. A large back, dark gray, water streaming off in rivulets. The calf could see the spine, the shoulder blades, the thick curve of muscle that meant adult, meant protection, meant someone who could decide what to do. The calf reached out with its trunk. The touch was gentle. A tap against the flank, then a soft exploration along the spine, the way elephant calves greet their mothers, their herd, their family. The skin beneath the calf's trunk was thick, warm, covered in a thin layer of algae. Familiar texture, familiar size. The shape turned. A massive head broke the surface, but the head was wrong. The skull too broad, the snout too short, the nostrils flaring open too wide. No trunk, no tusks, just an enormous pink mouth that opened in surprise, showing teeth meant for crushing, for grinding, but for warning. A hippopotamus. The calf jerked backward, water sloshing, and for one terrible moment it stood frozen, processing. Not elephants. The shapes in the water, 6 of them now turning to look, were all hippos. Wide, barrel-bodied, with eyes that sat high on their heads and ears that flicked forward with irritation. The calf's ears snapped open. Its trunk curled tight against its chest. From somewhere deep in its body, it pulled out a sound, a high, thin trumpet that cracked halfway through, desperate and lost. The call went out across the water hole, across the dried pan, into the empty fever tree grove. No one answered. The hippos watched. The largest one, a female, probably the matriarch of this pod, huffed once, a warning sound deep in her throat. The others shifted, uneasy, but not aggressive. They were used to elephants at this waterhole, used to sharing space, but a lone calf this small, making sounds of distress. This was something outside the normal pattern. The calf stood in water up to its chest, surrounded by hippos, calling for a mother who couldn't hear. From the bank, a marabou stork watched with clinical interest. A crocodile surfaced briefly 20 meters away, assessed the situation, and sank back down. The sun climbed higher. The temperature pushed past 40 degrees Celsius. The calf stopped calling. It stood, swaying slightly, in the water that was keeping it alive and surrounded by the giants that were not its family. Its temporal glands wept. Its eyes had the glazed, distant look of trauma, the look of a mind that has reached the edge of what it can process and simply stopped. It had called for its mother, but no one had answered. Dr. James Kariuki had been a wildlife veterinarian for 16 years, but he'd never seen anything like this. He stood on the ridge overlooking the Kemena waterhole, binoculars pressed to his face, watching a scene that made no ecological sense. Below, in the shallows, a pod of 6 hippos lounged in their typical afternoon stupor, and among them, moving with the careful, exhausted steps of someone who had nowhere else to go, was an elephant calf, not passing through, not drinking and leaving, staying. Beside him, Sarah Mwangi, head ranger for this section of the conservancy, checked her notes. 3 days, maybe 4. The Maasai scouts had reported it first, following the hippos. When they came out to graze at night, it walked behind. When they went back to water at dawn, it went too. The calf was trying to join their pod. Through the binoculars, James watched the calf take 3 steps through the shallows, then stop. Its legs were shaking. Its skin looked wrong, wrinkled, hanging loose, the texture of dehydration setting in. The temporal glands on its face were dark with secretion. 3 years old, maybe 3.5, still nursing age, still an age where an elephant calf should never be more than a trunk's length from its mother. James scanned the surrounding area. The drone had gone up twice, nothing within 15 kilometers. The herd had moved south during the panic. Lions pushed through, scattered them. This one got separated. The calf stood beside a large female hippo, not touching, but close. Close enough that if it closed its eyes, if it heard only the breathing and the water and the deep rumble of a large body existing, it might be able to pretend. The science of it made sense, in a terrible way. Elephant calves navigate by sound and vibration as much as sight. The rumble of a herd moving, the seismic thump of large feet. These are the sounds of safety. The hippos, when they walked, sounded big enough, heavy enough, and the calf was exhausted enough, desperate enough, that its brain had grabbed onto the only familiar thing in a landscape gone alien, the sound of giants. Sarah headed for the truck. The approach took 2 hours. They parked 300 meters out and walked in slow increments. James carried the medical pack. Sarah carried the pole syringe loaded with sedative. As they descended, the dehydration was severe. Skin pulled back around the calf's eyes, ears hung limp, back legs dragging slightly. 3 days locked in broken instinct. Stay with the herd. 50 meters out, the hippos noticed them. The matriarch lifted her head, ears flicking forward. The others oriented toward the approaching humans. The calf didn't notice. It stood with eyes half closed, trunk hanging in the water, swaying. 30 meters. The hippos moved. All at once, they pushed toward deeper water, massive bodies creating waves. The matriarch went first, then the others, heading toward the center where they could submerge. The calf stood frozen, watching them go. James saw the moment it registered. The ears came up, the trunk lifted, and the calf took 3 stumbling steps after them, calling. That same high, broken trumpet it had been making for days. The hippos kept moving. They didn't look back. The calf stopped at the edge where the shallows dropped off. It stood there, trunk extended toward the shapes disappearing into brown water, and made a sound that James would remember for the rest of his career. Not a trumpet, not a rumble. Something between a whimper and a moan, a sound of pure loss. The calf's head swung around, eyes wild, its body coiled, ready to bolt. But bolt where? Into the deep water where it would drown? Into the thorn scrub where it would collapse? Instead, it did something that broke James's heart. The calf turned and ran toward the hippos. It splashed into deeper water, legs churning, trunk held high to breathe. The hippos were 15 meters ahead, backs visible as dark islands. The calf swam toward them with everything it had left, which wasn't much. Its head kept dipping under. Its breathing was ragged. I panicked. James was running before he thought about it. He hit the water at a sprint, boots filling, medical pack forgotten on the bank. The calf was 10 meters from the hippos when it went under. It surfaced, choking, eyes white-rimmed, pupils blown with terror. It went under again. James reached it in 5 strokes. His hand found the calf's shoulder, then its neck, and he pulled its head up, felt the desperate gasp as it sucked in air. The body was light, too light, bone sharp beneath skin that had lost its elasticity. James held the calf's head above water, talking in a low, steady stream of sound. The calf thrashed once, a weak protest, then seemed to run out of fight. He began pulling it toward shallower water. Sarah was there when they reached the shallows. Together, they guided the calf up onto the bank. It stood. A water streaming from its body, legs splayed wide to keep balance. Its whole body was shaking. James reached for the pole syringe. The calf saw the movement, saw the metal pole, saw the needle, and it ran. Not toward the hippos this time. They had fully submerged. The calf ran parallel to the shore, a stumbling, desperate gallop. Sarah moved to cut it off, but it veered away, circled back, and did something that James knew he would see in nightmares. The calf ran toward a hippo that had surfaced near the shallows, a large male, scarred and old. It ran straight at him and tried to hide behind his bulk, the way a calf would hide behind its mother when scared. The hippo turned his head, mouth opening in surprise. The calf pressed itself against the hippo's flank, trunk curled tight, eyes squeezed shut. Using the predator as a shield. Using the thing that could kill it as protection. Because it was the only thing big enough, the only thing that even resembled safety. The hippo huffed, confused but not aggressive. He shifted slightly, and the calf shifted with him, trying to stay hidden, stay sheltered, stay anywhere but alone. James stood knee-deep in water, pole syringe useless in his hands, watching an elephant calf seek comfort from a hippopotamus, because that was all it had left. For 3 days, hippos had been the only family it had. They retreated to the ridge and waited. They would try again at dark when the hippos came out to graze. The calf might not make it to dark. Its temporal glands wept steadily, dark tracks down its face catching the afternoon light. Its breathing was shallow, rapid. The sun crawled across the sky with brutal slowness. But James watched through binoculars as the calf stood in the shallows, sometimes moving to follow the hippos as they shifted positions, sometimes just standing still, staring at nothing. At 1847, as the sun touched the horizon, the hippos started their evening emergence. The matriarch came out first and began the slow walk toward the grazing grounds. The others followed in a loose line, and at the end, walking with the careful, exhausted steps of something running on willpower alone, came the calf. James and Sarah moved down from the ridge with the truck, headlights off, engine idling quietly. 2 scouts positioned on either side, ready to prevent the calf from bolting back toward the water. The hippos walked southeast toward their favored grassland. The calf followed 10 meters behind, a trunk occasionally reaching forward as if to touch the hippo ahead of it, never quite making contact. In the dying light, the scene looked almost peaceful. A herd moving to feed, a youngster trailing behind. Except the youngster didn't belong. At 19:03, when the hippos were far enough from the water, James gave the signal. The truck's headlights blazed on. 2 spotlights followed, catching the calf in a circle of white light. The calf froze, blinded. The hippos scattered, vanishing into the darkness beyond the lights within seconds. The calf stood alone in the spotlight. It turned in a full circle, trunk raised, searching for the shapes that had just been there. Its ears were spread so wide, James could see the network of veins lit from behind. It opened its mouth and called. The sound was quieter this time. Hoarse, like it was running out of voice. James approached from the left, pole syringe ready. Sarah approached from the right. The calf's head swiveled between them, calculating, looking for an escape route. The calf took 2 steps backward. Its back legs buckled slightly, caught, held. James was 3 meters away when he extended the pole. The calf tried to dodge, but it was too slow, too exhausted. The needle found the shoulder muscle, depressed, delivered the sedative. The calf pulled away, took 5 stumbling steps, then stopped. James watched its legs. The calf stood still, breathing hard. Its trunk reached out into the darkness where the hippos had gone. Slowly, its trunk lowered. Its ears began to fold back. The shaking in its legs increased, then smoothed out into something that looked almost like calm. After 90 seconds, the calf's legs buckled. James was there before it hit the ground, supporting its weight, guiding it down onto its side in the dirt. Sarah was beside him immediately, checking vitals. Pulse weak, respiratory rate elevated, temperature 39.8. Fever. James ran his hands over the calf's body. Severe dehydration, muscle wasting starting. No visible injuries. Tacky membranes. They needed IV fluids immediately. They worked in practiced synchronization. Sarah had the IV catheter in the ear vein within 2 minutes. James set up the fluid bags, lactated ringers, antibiotics, anti-inflammatories, glucose. The calf lay still under the lights, eyes half open, breathing slowly. Its temporal glands still wept. But the shaking had stopped. 3 years old, 72 hours alone, severe dehydration, a psychological trauma that couldn't be measured but could kill just as surely as physical injury. If they could stabilize it tonight, if they could get it to the sanctuary by morning, maybe. One of the scouts brought blankets. They draped them over the calf's body, trying to prevent shock. The truck's generator hummed, powering the lights that kept the darkness at bay. In that darkness, somewhere, the hippos grazed. Tomorrow they would return to their waterhole, would resume their lives, would forget the strange small elephant that had walked among them for 3 days. But the elephant would not forget them. James stayed beside the calf through the night, monitoring fluids, checking vitals. At 3:20, the calf stirred. Its trunk twitched, reaching out, feeling the air, still searching, still hoping. At 5:45, as the eastern horizon began to pale, James made the decision to move. The calf was stable enough for transport. They loaded it into the truck on a bed of hay and blankets. Sarah sat beside it for the whole ride, one hand on its shoulder, talking to it in Swahili, in English, in the wordless murmuring sounds that mothers use. The calf's eyes were open, but it wasn't seeing the truck, the road, the sunrise breaking over the plains. It was seeing a shape in the water, a broad back, the sound of breathing that was almost right. It was seeing the family that wasn't its family, because that was all it had. The David Sheldrick Wildlife Trust's nursery sat in the shadow of Nairobi National Park, designed to replicate what orphaned elephants had lost: safety, routine, and herd. At 7:23, the truck carrying the calf from Kimana rolled through the main gate. Angela Kamau had been an elephant keeper for 9 years. She'd raised 14 orphans from near death to release. But when James Kariuki called ahead, 3 years old, separated during lion panic, found living with hippos, even Angela paused, living with them, for 3 days. Maybe 4. They didn't accept it. They just didn't kill it. Angela stood in the quarantine area, watching as the truck's rear gate lowered and 2 keepers guided a gray shape down the ramp on shaking legs. The calf stood in the morning light, blinking, and its skin was wrinkled from dehydration despite a night of IV fluids. Its eyes had that distant, shuttered look, the look of an animal whose mind had gone somewhere else to survive. The calf's ears flicked, but its gaze didn't focus. It stood swaying, trunk hanging limp. James climbed down, looking like he hadn't slept. Vitals improved overnight. Temperature down, still not eating. Wouldn't take milk. 5 days. Maybe 6 since it last ate. For a 3-year-old calf still nursing, that was approaching critical. More than physical starvation, there was the psychological component, the refusal to eat, the shutting down, the decision that some traumatized animals make that living is too hard. Not all orphans survived the first week, not because their bodies failed, but because their minds did. And the quarantine stable was designed for this: a large enclosure with soft dirt flooring, scattered hay, a water trough, and privacy from the main herd. They guided the calf inside, removed the IV catheter, and stepped back. The calf stood in the center of the space, not moving, not exploring, just standing. Its trunk occasionally twitched, reaching out to touch something that wasn't there. Angela closed the gate quietly. James stared at the calf with the particular intensity of someone who had made a promise to themselves that this one would live. The calf was looking for them, not the herd, the hippos. Angela turned back to look. The calf had walked to the far corner of the enclosure and was standing with its back to the wall, trunk extended into the empty air ahead of it. And the posture was unmistakable, the posture of an elephant standing in water, trunk reaching toward the shape of a hippo's back. It thought that's what herd meant now: wide bodies, deep voices, the smell of water. James turned to leave. The scouts had been calling it Kimana, after the water hole. The word meant butterfly in some dialects, or possibly change. The etymology was unclear. The calf, Kimana, didn't respond to its new name. It stayed in the corner, recreating a memory of safety that had never really been safe at all. The first 24 hours were the hardest. Kimana refused milk, refused the specially mixed formula that Angela offered in a bottle, that she poured into a bucket, that she finally tried to hand-feed using a soaked cloth. The calf turned away from all of it, ears back, trunk curled tight, and it also refused to lie down. Through the entire first day and night, Kimana stood in the corner of the enclosure, swaying, sometimes taking a few steps in a small circle before returning to the wall. Angela stayed in the stable with it, sleeping in 2-hour increments on a cot, waking to check if anything had changed. Nothing changed. By the morning of the second day, Angela made a decision. At 9:30, she opened the gate between the quarantine stable and the adjacent enclosure. The adjacent enclosure housed 3 other orphans: a 4-year-old female named Sana, who had been orphaned by poachers, a 5-year-old male named Kito, who had fallen into a well, and a 6-year-old female named Naima, who had been found alone and starving after drought killed her herd. They were the Trust's current residents, and they were, Angela hoped, the answer. The moment the gate opened, all 3 orphans' heads came up, trunks extended, scenting the air. Elephants have vomeronasal organs that can detect pheromones from miles away. the scent of fear, of stress, of other elephants. They smelled Kimana immediately. Sana was the first to approach. She moved to the open gate, trunk weaving, and made a low rumbling sound deep in her chest. In the quarantine stable, Kimana's head jerked up. It was the first response Angela had seen in 18 hours. Kimana's ears came forward, its trunk lifted, scenting. Sana rumbled again. The sound was barely audible to human ears, but Angela could feel it, a vibration in her sternum, in the ground beneath her feet. The infrasonic communication that elephants use to talk across miles of savanna. Kimana took one step forward, then another. On its trunk was weaving now, searching. Sana stepped through the gate into the quarantine stable. She was larger than Kimana, her movements confident, unhurried. She approached the smaller calf directly, trunk extended in greeting. Kimana stood frozen as Sana's trunk touched its face. A gentle exploration, across the forehead, down the ridge of the trunk, over the temporal gland. Reading scent, reading history, reading trauma. Then Sana did something that made Angela's chest tighten. She wrapped her trunk around Kimana's trunk and held it. Not pulling, not forcing, just holding. The elephant version of taking someone's hand. For 5 seconds, Kimana stood rigid. Then it exhaled. A long, shuddering breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep in its body. Its ears, which had been clamped back for 2 days, slowly relaxed. Its trunk, which had been curled tight, loosened in Sana's grasp. Sana rumbled again, and this time Kimana rumbled back. It was barely a sound, a whisper of a rumble, but it was there. Behind Sana, Quito and Naima had moved to the gate, watching. Quito made a high-pitched trumpet, the sound young males make when excited. Naima responded with her own rumble, a greeting, an invitation. Kimana's head turned toward them. Its whole body was trembling, but it was a different kind of trembling now. Not exhaustion, not fear. Something else. Recognition. Angela held her breath. Kimana took one step toward the gate, then another. Sana stayed beside it, trunk still gently holding Kimana's trunk, guiding it forward. Together they walked through the gate. Quito immediately moved to Kimana's other side, his larger body providing shelter. Naima circled around behind, completing the formation. And suddenly, Kimana was surrounded, enclosed in a moving wall of gray bodies that smelled right, sounded right, felt right. The 4 elephants stood together in the center of the main enclosure, trunks intertwining, touching faces, touching ears, creating the constant tactile communication that elephants need the way humans need air. Kimana's trunk reached up to touch Sana's mouth. Sana opened her mouth slightly, letting Kimana's trunk explore inside, the elephant gesture of intimacy, of trust, of family. And for the first time in 6 days, Kimana closed its eyes. Not in exhaustion, not in shutdown, in relief. Kimana still wouldn't eat. The herd formation had helped. Over the next 3 days, Kimana began to move around the enclosure, following Sana, mimicking Quito. He'd learning from Naima. But whenever Angela brought milk, Kimana turned away. When the others ate their formula, Kimana watched but didn't join. On the 4th day, Angela called James. It was bonding with the other orphans, but wouldn't feed. Weight was dropping, 40 kilos since intake. It was burning muscle now. They might need to tube feed, but Angela wanted to try one more thing first. Makena. Makena was not an orphan. She was a 32-year-old elephant cow who had grown up at the trust, been successfully released to Tsavo, lived wild for 15 years, and then voluntarily returned when she became pregnant. She'd given birth at the sanctuary, raised her calf for 2 years with the help of the keepers, and then done something unprecedented. She stayed. For the past 5 years, Makena had been the sanctuary's unofficial matriarch. She wasn't kept in an enclosure. She came and went as she pleased, moving between the sanctuary and the wild herds in Nairobi National Park, but she always came back. And whenever she came back, the orphans gathered around her the way planets gather around a sun. She was, Angela believed, the thing that turned a collection of traumatized calves into a herd. At 1400, Makina walked through the sanctuary gate. Angela had called her the way the keepers sometimes did, by standing at the forest edge and rumbling, a specific pattern of infrasound that meant, "Come, we need you." Whether Makina could actually hear it from wherever she was, or whether she simply had an instinct for when the sanctuary needed her, Angela didn't know. But she always came. Makina was massive. Nearly 3 meters tall at the shoulder, with tusks that had been worn down by decades of digging for roots and stripping bark. Her ears were tattered at the edges. Her body was scarred, from buffalo, from thorns, from the simple accumulation of living. She walked with the slow, deliberate grace of an elephant who knew exactly who she was. The orphans had heard her coming. All 4 of them, Sana, Quito, Naima, and Kimana, were standing at the enclosure fence, trunks extended toward the approaching shape. Makina reached the fence and stopped. For a long moment, she simply looked at them. Her trunk wove slowly, scenting each in turn. When it passed over Kimana, it paused. Makina's ears came forward. Her eyes, small and dark and impossibly deep, focused on the smallest calf. She rumbled. The sound was different from the rumbles of the young orphans. Deeper, longer, a sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. The kind of sound that matriarchs use when they're claiming a calf, when they're saying, "Mine, I will protect this one. I will teach this one. I will make sure this one survives." Kimana went absolutely still. Angela watched the calf's ears spread wide, the trunk lift and weave, the whole body orient toward Makina with the intensity of recognition. Not recognition of this specific elephant, recognition of what this elephant was. Matriarch, elder, mother. Angela opened the enclosure gate. Makina walked through slowly, giving the calves time to scatter if they wanted. None of them scattered. They moved toward her instead, surrounding her, trunks touching her face, her shoulders, her legs. Asana made a high-pitched squeal of excitement. Quito rumbled. Naima pressed her forehead against Makina's flank. And Kimana, small, traumatized Kimana, who hadn't responded to anything in 4 days, walked straight up to Makina and stopped. Makina's trunk came down. She touched Kimana's face with the kind of gentleness Angela had only seen in mothers with newborns. The tip of her trunk traced the lines of Kimana's temporal glands, still dark with stress secretion. She rumbled again, quieter this time, a private sound meant only for this calf. Kimana's trunk reached up. It touched Makina's mouth, explored inside, felt the tongue, the breath, the particular texture that meant this is safe, this is family, this is the shape of home. Then Kimana did something that made Angela's eyes burn. The calf stepped forward. It pressed its body against Makina's front leg and slid underneath her massive belly. The nursing position. Kimana was too old to nurse. Makina wasn't lactating, but the position wasn't about food. It was about something older than hunger, deeper than appetite. It was about finding the space beneath the mother's body where the world can't hurt you. Kimana stood there, pressed tight against Makina's belly, trunk curled, eyes closed. And Makina stood absolutely still, her body a canopy of protection, her presence a promise. They stayed like that for 20 minutes. When Kimana finally emerged, it walked with Makina to the feeding area where the keepers had set up bottles of formula. Sana, Quito, and Naima were already drinking. Makina stopped at the line of bottles, selected one with her trunk, and began to drink. Kimana watched. Makina finished her bottle, then picked up another and held it. She turned her head to look at Kimana, trunk extended, offering. Kimana took 3 steps forward. Its trunk reached out, wrapped around the bottle, and pulled. The first swallow was tentative, the second stronger. By the third, Kimana was drinking with the desperate focus of starvation finally allowed to end. It finished the bottle in 90 seconds, then reached for another. Angela stood at the fence with tears openly running down her face. She keyed her radio. James answered, his voice rough with emotion, when she told him it was eating. 2 bottles so far. going for a third. Angela watched Kimana drain the third bottle, watched Makina's trunk rest gently on the calf's back, watched the other orphans crowd close in a formation that said, "We are heard, you are safe, so you are ours." She had given it a mother. 6 weeks later, Kimana had gained back all the lost weight and added 15 kilos more. The wrinkles in its skin had smoothed out. The temporal gland secretions had stopped. The distant, shuttered look in its eyes had been replaced by something brighter, more present. It followed Makina everywhere. When Makina went to the forest edge to strip bark, Kimana was beside her, learning. When Makina went to the mud wallow, Kimana followed, rolling with the pure joy of an elephant who had forgotten what play felt like. When Makina rumbled to the wild herds in Nairobi National Park, Kimana stood pressed against her leg, absorbing the language of elephants who had never known captivity. The other orphans had become siblings. Sana taught Kimana how to steal the best vegetables from the keeper's buckets. Kito played the wrestling games that young males need. Naima showed Kimana the secret places, the scratching tree, the soft dirt perfect for dust bathing. They were a herd now. Not a collection of orphans. A herd. Angela watched them from the observation platform one evening as the sun turned the Nairobi sky orange and gold. Makina was leading the group toward the forest edge for their evening browse. Sana and Naima flanked her on either side. Kito brought up the rear, and in the middle, touching Makina's leg with every few steps, was Kimana. James Kariuki had come to visit. Heart rate normal, blood work clean, gaining weight steadily, socializing beautifully. It didn't like sudden loud noises. Gets skittish if the herd moves too fast, has to sleep touching Makina. But it was healing. They all heal, eventually. As long as they have herd. They watched Kimana reach up with its trunk to pull down an acacia branch exactly the way Makina had shown it. The motion was confident, practiced. The motion of an elephant who knew how to be an elephant. Angela was quiet for a long moment. She thought it remembered surviving. And she thought it knew the difference now, between surviving and belonging. In the forest, Makina rumbled, a low sound calling the herd together as darkness approached. The orphans gathered around her, forming the protective cluster that elephants make at night. Kimana took its place pressed against Makina's belly, trunk resting on Sana's back, surrounded by the sound of breathing and heartbeat and the quiet rumbles of elephants saying, "We are here, you are safe, this is home." For the first time in its life, Kimana slept without searching, without reaching for shapes in the water, without calling for someone who couldn't hear. It finally knew what family smelled like, tasted like, sounded like. Not the deep grunt of hippos in water, but the rumble of elephants in starlight, the sound of giants who would answer when it called, the sound of home.